book review on video. This time, Inkheart by the German writer Cornelia Funke, I want to say. I think my pronunciation has been a bit too influenced by Arrested Development. My German isn't very good, so let's just say Cornelia. This is a book that I'd heard a lot about, but hadn't read until last month, I think it was. Actually, February. It's the kind of book that you always think, oh yeah, I should read that, I should pick that up, but you kind of don't get around to it. So this is a traveling book, a book crossing book. It's a book ray, or possibly a book ring. It's traveling from one reader to the other, and that's just a wonderful way to share, and not only the actual book, but also opinions and thoughts, to ask questions, and to see what other readers think of books that you either like or don't like. In this case, I actually like this book a lot. It is a book for young readers, and that's pretty obvious. Like I said, it's a German book originally. This is an English language edition. So I can only speak for the translation. I don't know how well it reflects the original book, but I definitely felt it reading it. This is not a book for adults, or intended for adults. This book has language that, unlike actually most of the young adult fiction that I read, really marks it out as not for grown-ups. It's hard to explain exactly what I mean, but it's as a grown-up. If I had been a kid when I read it, let's say I'd been 12, I would just have loved the book completely, I'm sure. I wouldn't have thought much about the language, but as an adult now reading it, I definitely feel that the language is, from my vantage point, talking down to me a little bit. So it is what it is. Don't expect great literature language-wise, because I do think that, original or translated, the author has been very aware when writing that this is going to be not for adults, but for young readers. Older children, teenagers. But apart from that, I thought this was really a wonderful, wonderful book. I didn't know much about it, because it was the kind of thing where I thought, I'm gonna read that book sooner or later, regardless, so I don't really have to know what it's about, because I'm gonna read it anyway. I just knew it was a fantasy story, a widely popular fantasy story for young readers, so I just assumed, for some reason, that it was a real fantasy, fully fledged fantasy, set in a fantasy world. So I was quite surprised when I started reading and discovered that it's not at all set in a fantasy world. Quite the contrary. It is set in our world, and fantasy characters have escaped into our world. The story is very simply that the main character, a young girl, Maggie, she lives alone with her father. Her mother's dead and or gone. And her father, he restores old books. So of course he has created in Maggie a very strong passion for books. She loves books, she loves to read. And that's thanks to her father, who, still for some mysterious reason, never reads to her. And they live alone in a charming old house. He works, she goes to school, she's 12 years old, and everything's fine. Her mother disappeared so long ago that she isn't really upset by it now. She doesn't remember her. But one day, a mysterious person comes to visit, gives her father an equally mysterious warning, and suddenly they're leaving. They're going to visit a relative that Maggie barely remembers, and the grown-ups are talking about strange things she doesn't understand, and she's caught up in this, I want to say, crazy adventure, but it's quite a dark adventure. It's not for the very youngest readers. I wouldn't read this to, say, a 6-year-old, because this is a pretty scary book. It has a lot of bad things happening. There's blood and gore. It's again for young readers, but not for children, because a lot of pretty bad things happen. The characters, I think most of them, not all of them, but most of them, are really good. They're characters that you care about, and that are They make sense in their setting. You can understand their reactions. They may not be entirely plausible as real people, all of them, but you really understand the way that they react, which I think is important. Maybe especially in a book for readers who are not very experienced in literature yet. The setting is really great. It moves around quite a lot. There's one focal point where a lot of the action takes place, and it's again pretty dark, but it's a convincing, interesting setting. And the plot, I thought, moved forward at a very good pace. It never lags, but you also don't have a lot of, which sometimes happen in books for this age group, that you have a lot of stuff just thrown at you, so you can barely keep up. I didn't feel that this happened here. I felt that she really managed to keep a steady pace without overloading the reader. There are also sort of resting spaces in the novel where you can think about what just happened and what's going to happen and where you think the story's going to go. Again, if I was 12 years old, I'm sure I would have absolutely adored this book. So if you have young teens, kids who love to read in your life, just as long as they're not too young, then this would probably be a wonderful present. And if you feel that it's okay for a book to be very clearly written for another age group that you're not a part of, then definitely it's an entertaining book for adults as well. It's well written. This edition was well translated. With a good plot, good characters, not the best language, but it more than makes up for that with a lot of other strengths. And I think if I get the chance, I'll probably be reading the next two books as well. This is the first book in a trilogy. Gee, fantasy trilogy, how original. Inkheart by German writer Cornelia something or other.